Okay, while we are waiting for Olga to set up the recording, I will not start the presentation, but I will do a brief introduction to how I would like to structure it. So first of all, I'd like to simplify the explanation of single-use seals, a concept created by Peter Todd, which is, I found over the years that people really struggle to understand it. And I myself struggled a lot to understand it, especially because it brings a lot of new terminology to the industry, which was never used before, neither in blockchain industry or computing industry. And this terminology is not very intuitive. So I will cover what Peter Todd meant by single-use seals and how they operate, and what are the main terms related to the single-use seals. Then I will move to how the single-use seals can be structured, can be designed, because the single-use seal is a generic idea, the same type of generic idea like a blockchain or computing. And there are multiple ways how you can actually create single-use seals. And you can have even single-use seals in the real world, not only in the computing world. So I will cover this logic, and then we will see how the single-use seals can be applied to Bitcoin. There are multiple ways of how they can be applied, and each of that way have their own trade-offs and potential application areas. And from that, I will come to these potential applications, explaining how specifically single-use seals can be used for those applications. So that's my plan. Olga, do you have any good news for us, or? She is probably busy.
I have a good news from Perry. Yes, thank you. If you have already started the recording, I'll probably rely on you this time. Then just send it over and I'll publish it across all the channels that we have. Thank you very much. Maxim, so when you're ready, you can start.
Okay, I'm ready. So the recording is on, right?
Yes.
Okay, so single-use seals and how they can be applied to the hot topics of interest of these days. What is single-use seal? Again, as I said, the concept and the idea of single-use seal was coined by Peter Todd. As far as I know, maybe Giacomo, who is here, he will prove me, but as far as I know, after his work on the open timestamps, he thought what we can do more than we can do just with the timestamps, and he found that there is a specific pattern or a cryptographic primitive that was never discussed before, which allows things that is impossible with just simple open timestamps. And he named this pattern single-use seals. So, Giacomo, am I correct in this historical introduction?
It is. It is. Let's say that the frame of the research was inside a asset token related project, because we had that kind of commission from a client, but he was just finishing open timestamps, and the line of thought that brought him to the generalization was exactly that. I will only add that he already presented the design in a Breaking Bitcoin conference Milan as a possible alternative design for Bitcoin itself. There was a session in Breaking Bitcoin that was how could Bitcoin be different if we had to design it from scratch, and he presented that idea, and then he resurrected it 1 year later when we discussed it RGB the first time. But basically, yes, it's an evolution of his open timestamps research.
Yes. So how he defined the single-use seal? According to Peter, which is actually the only definition that exists today, and I completely agree with this approach, the single-use seal is a form of cryptographical commitment application, meaning applied cryptographical commitment. You probably already know what is cryptographical commitment, and there are multiple schemas of cryptographical commitments exist. So single-use seal is a set of different schemas with a cryptographical commitment with a certain properties, and these properties make the single-use seals more advanced than just a simple commitments like hash functions or gists of a message, and more advanced than timestamps. And a single-use seal is not just a single commitment. It combines the commitment with a stuff that is named proof of publication or proof of publication medium, another concept introduced by Peter Todd. And this is a generalization of Bitcoin layer. Generalization meaning that you may have a proof of publication medium without blockchain. You may have it with a physical mediums or with a different forms of distributed systems. And I will briefly cover that a bit later. So proof of publication medium is the stuff required for single-use seals, and it is not necessary a blockchain, which is also an important point. But it can be a blockchain. And the main task of this proof of publication medium is to prevent a double spend or a double commitment, because we're not spending something with a single-use seals actually, so with the proper term will be double commitment, prevention of double commitment, but basically it is the same concept as blockchain is used to prevent double spending of Bitcoin, and that's what makes Bitcoin blockchain a proof of publication medium. But there are other potential proof of publication medium, hypothetically more advanced. Today we will be mostly talking about application of single-use seals to Bitcoin, and meaning that it is underneath we still have a Bitcoin blockchain, but I just want to keep your eyes wide open that it's not just a Bitcoin application. It may be more generic thing. And a brief definition of this proof of publication, which is really important to understand the rest of the concept, by Peter Todd is the following. Proof of publication is any kind of medium, digital or physical, that solves the double spend or double commitment problem. And it has these three main properties. You need to be able to prove that every member of certain audience has received a message. And the real world analogy that Peter gives to that is that let's assume that there is a legal notice published by a major newspaper, and we can assume that any subscriber, meaning member of auditor of subscribers, received that legal notice, a message, and he had a chance to read it. So in this case, we see the newspaper, major newspaper, as a proof of publication medium having this property. The second thing that you need to prove, to be able to prove with a proof of publication medium, is that some other message has not been published. So extending that analogy, any court can easily determine that a legal notice was not published when it should have been by examining the newspaper archives. So it's pretty obvious. And you see that it's not just digital concept, it's more generic concept. And finally, you need to prove that some member is the part of the audience that receives this proof of publication based messages. And here, with a newspaper, we can have ability to define a particular piece of the newspaper space, potential state space, where we have to look to a specific message, meaning it could be a date of the newspaper and specific part of the column where we will put the message. So to summarize, this combination of the single-use seal commitment and proof of publication medium, I will provide the definition by Peter Todd, a little bit edited by me to make it more simple to understand. Single-use seal is a commitment, so it's a cryptographic commitment, but it's not just a commitment, it is commitment to commit. It's a formal promise to create another commitment. So it consists of double commitment. First, we commit to create a future commitment to a yet potentially unknown message. So today we don't know message, but we say that we promise to create a commitment to a yet unknown message in the future, once and only once. So we can create the commitment to that message in the future only once. And such we can create commitment such that that commitment fact will be provably known to all members of certain audience. Sorry. So again, I understand that this is hard to understand, and that's why single-use seals is so unintuitive. But I will be giving an example with a newspaper that will explain each of parts of the definition. So jumping to the next slide, explaining how the single-use. So I will go how the single-use seal is structured, and then we'll provide this explanation with a newspaper example. Single-use seal, the intuition, to build the intuition behind single-use seal terminology, we need to look into the term, and term meaning is these seals, you probably all of you are known them, which you can close of a certain container, and everybody may check that it wasn't broken. The seal wasn't broken, and make sure that the seal is closed. So Peter took this analogy, but brought it to a different world. And if you will take this seal close over a certain container, the closed seal is here, but the container, in terms of Peter taught, is the message. And he says that we close the single-use seal over a message. So it's kind of, this is single-use seal in blue, and there is certain message, and we close this seal over the message. So that is the proper terminology. And I'd like to ask everybody to avoid things like we open seal. There is no open seal. It's either defined or closed over certain message. So with a newspaper, we have this two-stage process with the single-use seals. First, we define the seal. And the seal definition is the specific description of the place in the proof of publication medium where the seal will be placed. And here, with a newspaper as example of physical proof of publication medium, we can say that the top right corner of the old newspaper is the seal, and this is seal definition. And the second part of the definition, we need to specify exact issue, and we say that the top right corner of the newspaper that will be published on the 1st of July 2021. This is the definition of single-use seal. And now, before the newspaper came, and when the newspaper came, the 1st of July has arrived. Actually, the message that appears in the top right corner of this issue is the message over which the seal is closed. So, coming back to the definition, in this example, a single-use seal is a promise by somebody, let's say Alice, public or private, to Bob, another party, which is a part of the audience who receives the proof of publication medium. And Alice make a promise to Bob to create a commitment to some message. And this message may be unknown at this point of time when Alice does this promise. And this promise is actual definition of the single-use seal. And to provide this definition and promise, she needs to specify the well-defined point inside this proof of publication medium where it will appear. So we have a seal defined. And then when Alice creates the commitment to that message at the defined point, she in fact closes the seal over the message, producing a structure so-called witness. And witness of the commitment, first of all, it has nothing to do with the SegWit and Bitcoin witnesses. It's just another word having multiple meanings. And in context of single-use seal, the actual witness is here. It's a newspaper, the physical piece of paper with the printed things on it. So that's a witness of the single-use seal closing. So regarding single-use seals, we have 3 procedures. The first is definition of seal. The second method is the closing of a seal over some message, and this method produces a witness. And there is a verification procedure that takes a seal, witness, and message and says, do we have that message? Do we have that seal defined and closed over that message using that witness of a proof of publication medium? And this brings us to the fact that with a single-use seal, we have 4 main data structures. The seal, the definition of the seal, the message, any data over which the seal is closed, the witness that proves that the seal was indeed closed, and the medium, which is a part of proof of publication medium, which we already have discussed. And coming back to the New York newspaper example, the medium is the printed newspaper. The seal definition is the definition that I just read, the first column of the issue published on specific date. The seal is the publishing slot, and the witness is the actual issue, the actual physical newspaper issued on that date, and the message is the content of that that is placed in the place of the seal definition. It's important to remember that unlike many people think when they read about single-use seals, there are certain things which we can't do with the single-use seals. For instance, we can't prove that the seal was not closed. It is impossible to prove that. We can't prove the absence of something. We can't prove that the certain issue of New York Times wasn't published on that date. Directly in terms of logic. So that's why the seal state is either closed or undefined. There is no such thing, an open seal. The seal is defined, and after that, we don't know that it's closed until we know that it is closed, and that's all we can say. So it's when the seal is defined, it becomes into undefined state, defined seal, but undefined closing state. And then when we receive a witness, we can verify and say that the seal is closed. As you see, there is nothing Bitcoin specific or even blockchain specific at the core of the single-use seal concept. It's really a cryptographic primitive, which were never widely used before, and that's why it's quite hard to explain, and it requires certain shift of paradigm, like the shift was required from going from database to blockchain model of thinking, which took, as you know, probably for some people years. This actually the summary of that procedures and breakdown. I wouldn't read this slide. I will just keep it here for the video recording, so everybody else struggling to understand my explanation can read it once again, and maybe it will help to better understand what single-use seal is. And before going further in the presentation, I would like to do a comparison of the single-use seals with other commitment schemes. And I brought 3 commitment schemes. The simple commitments, which is a digest or hash of message, and it doesn't use any proof of publication medium. There is a timestamps, which actually also require proof of publication medium, and the actual single-use seals. So 3 ways I will compare them. The first one is that the fact that the creation of commitment does not reveal the message itself. So we can create a commitment and publish the commitment without revealing the message. And it is true for all of the commitments. It's basically the property of cryptographic commitment. However, when we need to prove of the commitment time or prove the existence of the message before a certain date, we can't use simple commitments to that. We can't just create a digest, because there is no way to indicate the moment of time we created this digest. Even if we will make the date a part of the message we are committing to, nothing prevents us from creating a fake and naming a fake date. So that's why the timestamps were created, and they make possible to prove the existence of certain message before a certain date. And that's what they are mostly used for. And of course, it is possible with a single-use seal. So why we need to complicate things and just not use this timestamp? That's the use case which Peter Todd saw, and why he created the single-use seals. Because with the timestamps, we can't prove that there is no alternative commitment to that message or to a different message exists. So whenever we need to create a unique commitment and be able to prove that we had no way of creating any alternative commitment, that's when we need a single-use seals. And the most direct example of that is the prevention of double spending. When we need to prove that by spending these Bitcoins, we didn't spend these Bitcoins in any other alternative way, it's actually the definition of the single-use seal, and Bitcoin by itself is the single-use seal commitment system in these terms. But of course, we can build much more applications that the prevention of double spend with the single-use seals, what we will discuss next. So before proceeding further, maybe I've been too fast, but I'd like to really not spend all of the call for the presentation. If you are okay, let's discuss this part of the presentation, and we will then move forward. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a number, many which may be in these subsequent slides. I think the main thing is, although I appreciate the connection to the old style time stamping proof of putting it on the New York Times type of thing from Surify in the 90s. I'm particularly interested in the statement. Can you go back that one slide that has the four categories?
This one?
Proofs. Yeah.
No.
So
this.
So the prove that no alternative commitment can exist. So in this particular case, I'd like to see a specific example in Bitcoin, since we, mostly understand that legacy or SegWit, of what that final proof is. I mean, are you basically saying that a UTXO has been spent, and then you can prove from that UTXO? Does it use op returns? Can it use other, what are kind of the best practices of being able to prove that an alternative commitment, doesn't exist? I presume you're doing it off the UTXO, but I'd like to have a little bit more knowledge of that.
There is the UTXO is one of the ways, and actually the next part of the presentation will be about covering how the single-use seals can be applied to Bitcoin in different ways and explaining those ways. So maybe it will be the best answer to your question is actually, and if you will see that there is still something unclear, please ask and I will try to cover this topic. So the problem is that there is a lot of ambiguity when you talk about Bitcoin, because you can construct single-use seal type systems on top of Bitcoin in many ways. I know at least 4 of them. And Bitcoin itself is a single-use seal system. So we have 5 applications of single-use seals to Bitcoin blockchain. And in fact, we have Bitcoin blockchain as a single-use system by itself, and 4 ways of applying single-use seals to Bitcoin transaction graph, which may not be even a part of the blockchain. So the topic is really complicated, and I will try to explain it in more details and better over the next several slides. Any other questions? Or shall I proceed with this part? Okay. Just again, don't hesitate to interrupt me. So, what you can do with the single-use seals? With the single-use seals, you can do client-side validated systems which do not require global consensus, blockchain layer to be present, not even present, sorry, you require some proof of publication medium, and in most cases this is blockchain, but you don't require this proof of publication medium to store the data and store the actual message, full text message. You can store just a commitment, and that gives a huge gain for the scalability and of course a privacy, because you don't publish your data to the blockchain in any form other than randomness created with a cryptographic hash function. And you do the single-use seal definition on the client side. You don't need to publish anything into blockchain. You don't need to do a transaction. What you do is just to name the seal, saying, for instance, this specific UTXO is the seal. And you don't need to do any other operation than just sending a peer-to-peer message to the other parties you would like to inform about single-use seal definition. You don't need a global consensus on that because you are party defining the seal. No consensus required. And it's the same, taking back example of New York Times, when I say to you that the next issue on the New York Times next Monday is my single-use seal, top right corner, I am not publishing something to New York Times yet. I'm not informing New York Times. I don't need to get the agreement at this moment of time to do something. I just do this completely peer-to-peer, and nobody in the world, except those who present on this call, knows about the single-use seal definition. That's the flexibility and scalability gain, the first part of the flexibility and scalability gain that we get from. And the second, instead of publishing in the New York Times the whole message, let's say an article, I can publish there just a cryptographic hash of the article. That will be my message. And that will save me a lot of the money because I'm not occupying a lot of high valuable New York Times space or blockchain space. And I can pass the actual article peer-to-peer directly to you, and you may verify that the hash of this article is exactly the same I published in the New York Times, and you can be sure that there is no alternative article exists, and you are happy with this client-side validation model without spending a lot of money on first publishing the definition of the single-use seal and then occupying the space of high-priced medium to publish the actual message. So that's where the client-side validation concept begins, from single-use seals. It's another paradigm proposed by Peter Todd, and which was used in a number of solutions. And basically everything that is using single-use seal is a client-side validated system to a certain extent. In fact, not the otherwise is not true. So not the client-side validated systems include many other components than single-use seals. And probably we will cover this topic in more details on future presentations. We will be talking more about RGB specifically. Going beyond the single-use seals, when you try to create more complex applications of single-use seals, you will actually find the fact that you still need more functionality. And when you're building such things like assets, for instance, using RGB, you need a chain of single-use seals linked to each other, where each message defines a new seal. And that's why RGB is not equal to client-side validated single-use seals only. It requires many more other components. So how we can design a single-use seal implementation? How we can implement it in a different proof of publication mediums. Again, maybe the order of slides I have is not perfect, so I will jump a few slides and then come to them a bit later. So what can be a seal definition? The seal definition, if we take Bitcoin as example, can be at least two things. Maybe there are other seal definitions I'm not thinking about, but from my thoughts, I found just two ways of how you can create a single-use seal definition with Bitcoin. The first, a public key or an address, which is quite equivalent in this context, can be a single-use seal definition. So I can say that this specific public key is my seal definition, or this address is my seal definition, and whenever this specific public key from now on used in the transaction, that actually will close the single-use seal over certain message. So I can not specify a part of Bitcoin transaction or UTXO. I can just use a public key or an address. Another way of defining single-use seal with Bitcoin is defining Bitcoin transaction output, UTXO, namely, unspent transaction output. And the act of closing the seal over the message is the act of spending this transaction output. In both cases, we have to produce a witness, and that witness is, in fact, in first case, is the transaction using this public key or address, and in the second case, it is a transaction spending that specific UTXO. And how we can commit to this certain message. So when we define the single use seal, we define where it exists, but when we close it, we need to close it over a certain message. So we need to create a commitment to that message to fulfill the promise of the commitment. And in Bitcoin transaction, there are actually two places which can practically host that commitment to the message. There are certain ways how you can use other parts of the transaction, but they're not that practical. So they have very limited applicability or interoperability. So the normal thing you can use is just two scenarios. You can either use script seek or witness field, depending on the type of input, SegWit or non-SegWit output, or script pub key of the transaction output. And this gives us a core structure of single-use seal on Bitcoin blockchain. So we have a seal definition, then we have a transaction. It is always a transaction which closes that seal definition, either by spending UTXO. If it was a seal definition, the UTXO was a seal definition, or by using the public key for the first time. And it doesn't matter in which field it will use it. It can be completely unrelated inputs or outputs. And with that transaction, we need to put a commitment to the message. And this commitment can go either into the input script seek or wits field of the input that actually contains the information about the closed seal. So that spans UTXO or that uses that public key, which was defined as a single-use seal, or into some specific output script pub key. So that's where we place the commitment to the message. And how we can, if we will summarize all the ways we can fit in the commitment into the script, witness, seek script, or script pub key, there are just three ways of doing that. And all these ways can be considered rather good practices, and the one rather bad practice. So the good practice is to tweak the signature, in fact, the R component of the signature, and this named as sign to contract scheme. Its advantage is that it saves space in the client validated data. We don't need to keep the original public key as is required for the second option, the pay to contract scheme. However, it has at least two downsides. The first one, that last signer gets unfair advantage of failing commitment. So for instance, if you define UTXO as a single-use seal and then you spend it, the party that does the final signature and not committing to the message, he will still not lose Bitcoins. He will be able to keep the Bitcoins, but he will fail creating the commitment or can create commitment to the wrong message, and that actually gives an unfair advantage to one of those parties. But then this can be solved by Taproot, because in Taproot, when we use a multi-sig scheme, it is a MuSig. And I'm not 100% yet sure, but it seems that MuSig actually solves that problem, because you can't modify the actual content of the error value arbitrarily. However, in this case, it will be non-trivial to combine the sign to contract commitments with overall MuSig scheme. And the MuSig scheme is not finalized. There was first proposal, which were found to be have vulnerabilities. And now there is a second proposal, which looks better, but we don't yet sure that it doesn't have any vulnerabilities, and maybe there will be more proposals or changes in the MuSig structure.
So this is MuSig 2 you're speaking of currently,
yes,
and there's Frost and other things. Okay.
Yeah. So we are not sure how it will work in practice, and do we have a workable scheme and non-vulnerable scheme at all. And because of that, we can't say today that we can use sign to contract commitment scheme safely with a multi-sigs.
Can we?
The second good practice, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead and finish the slide. Sorry.
No.
No. This my comments more at the end of the slide.
Okay. The second way, we can do a pay-to-contract scheme by changing the public key value because of the discrete log problem. We will be able to prove that commitment by revealing the original public key and the message itself. But this will require us to store the original public key on the client side, which creates certain data overload. And the second problem with the public key tweaking is that it goes into the transaction output. And transaction may contain multiple outputs, not matching, and their number may not match the number of inputs. So how we will define which specific output will contain that commitment? That's another problem we need to solve. But overall, these are more or less good practices. The bad practice is to use op return and directly store a commitment there. This is bad practice, first of all, because it increases on-chain data. You basically store the data on-chain, which is a very bad and expensive practice. However, we still have to remember about this and cover this option, because there are old hardware wallets not supporting these more advanced schemes, and on that wallets you will have just no other option of creating commitment other than op return. Okay. So yeah, Christopher.
Yeah, so this is, at the core of what I'm wanting to try to move forward on, and I don't know how many more slides are there on Bitcoin. So I don't know how familiar you are with BTCR 0.1, which is the very first version of the DID. Some ways it was the first DID. And so we are doing some of this type of stuff, not necessarily using the same language, but it definitely, Peter Todd came to the first and second rebooting Web of Trusts, 5 and 5.5 years ago. And there were some very specific problems, which you kind of talk about here with, BTCR, that he said, oh, I've got this idea called single-use seals. I think solves it. Let's, I'll get back with you. And then, of course, several years later, he has still hadn't completely gotten back with us. And some of these have to do with some of these problems. And in the meantime, the world has moved on. The original BTCR took advantage of some legacy Bitcoin things that don't exist in SegWit and are even more, not so challenging, but different in Taproot Schnorr. So, we're now looking at BTCR 2.0, skipping 1.0 entirely, including offline and, other requiremms. And, we keep on getting people say, oh, go talk to Maxim, Dr. Orlovsky and,
just Maxim.
And, do that. And I'm kind of going, I'm not quite sure. I mean, we may not be using the exact same language, but it's, it is sort of the same thing. I mean, in the case of BTCR, by convention, the TX index, which points to a specific transaction, a spent transaction, has the option to also point to specific input or output inside that transaction is our baseline. Then in that transaction, the first right now by convention, the first output is where we put a UTXO, and the UTXO is a commitment to a future public-private key pair that once the UTXO is spent, you're now in effect revoking the the key in the transaction, and now you're going to use the new key in the spent transaction in there. So we had a lot of these types of things there, but the problem space is more of what that fits on this page. So there were, though we did use op-return was more to give pointers to other data. So one of the things you clearly could do is make a commitment to a an IPFS hash, or some other content addressable hash or whatever, to be able to get that other data and then use the key, the key. But we needed to both have a hash and a public key. And in the old pay to script hash, conveniently in the transaction was the key, whereas it's you have to have all of the historical data of SegWit and a lot of other information to be able to prove the same, to get the public key in the first place. So that was another challenge there. And then of course Peter Woolley, back in Rebooting 1, was one of the first to say, why aren't you doing this with signed to contract? A lot of the reasons why have to do with, one, signed to contract was difficult back then. Not a lot of libraries supported it and such, but also this, problem of the, when we start going multi-sig and, pay to script hash type functions. So anyhow, we're trying to make some decisions about Bitcoin 2. How are we going to do whatever form of single-use seal, both offline Bitcoin and then transitioning to online Bitcoin? How do we share the public key? How do we point to content addressable information? How do we, and in some ways not require it all to be stored on Bitcoin. Even the content addressable hash in the op return, many people said was too much. So you're going to have to get that in whatever it is you're going to have to prove. So other obstacles that we ran into with BTCR was that most people have prune nodes. You clearly can't do it efficiently with prune nodes, because you have to then go and find all the other all the other pieces. But even if you have a full node Bitcoin Core with TX index on, it still does not properly index all of the old transactions. So you really need an Explora or a hacked version of Bitcoin Core in order to even explore the full transaction data of the past, so that you can prove these commitments. And when we tried various Bitcoin daemons at the time, the other ones didn't perform fast enough. They were too slow. So we tried, it doesn't work in Bitcoin, still doesn't, without patches. And then we used libBitcoin, Go Bitcoin, and I think the Java Bitcoin as well. And all of those technically allowed us to index all the data, but we couldn't. So that was one of the reasons why BTCR has languished as a DID reference, and the world is now largely moving to bespoke blockchains or peer-to-peer non-blockchain things for decentralized identifiers, which I'm uncomfortable with because they don't have the same privacy, and I also want to do multi-sig. I want to be able to, a group of people to be able to say, this is something. So anyhow, that's my problem space, and why I wanted to chat with this community of, how do we get to the next, stage with this, and how do we deal with, getting the public key? Is it purely in the things that you verify? How do we point to this other data so that you can get other public keys and other things that you might need? And begin a discussion with your community and other communities that are desiring a more privacy-oriented decentralized identifier.
Right. So basically, I have to say that this is exactly the same problem space that we have witnessed during our work on the RGB. And well, I don't want to say that out loudly, but basically we were able to find a solution to them because today you can already play with RGB. We have everything up to the level of wallet. And let me split the solutions to this problems into two main blocks. The first block is how to properly structure these commitments inside Bitcoin transactions, which we name single-use seals, but of course the other terminology can be used for that. And starting from this slide, where I named all the trade-offs, for the case that is very much close to the one that you described, we found quite an optimal solution, which doesn't expose anything in terms of privacy, and which works with Electrum server indexing. So you don't need a hacked version of Bitcoin Core or anything specific other than just a normal Electrum server used by most of the existing wallets. And the next few slides I will be talking about that. And also we have the second block of the problem is the dealing with what we name client-side validated data, but again, it's basically the same stuff you are talking about, is how to keep the information which is not stored on-chain or which can be pruned on-chain. And with that, because we were working on the client-validated technology, we have built an infrastructure to handle those data and keep those data. And this infrastructure already implemented, and it doesn't require you as dedicated peer-to-peer network, and it can work on top of Lightning Network as well. So this basically solves the problems that you named, and this is what the rest of my presentation will be talking about today. And potentially that you may find some pieces of the solutions or parts to be a proper solutions to the puzzle that you have, and maybe something else will be useful for you as well. And at the very end, I will draft how you can construct this identity-based system using the single-use seals and the stuff that I'm describing, which probably very likely to what you have described, but with a little tweaks and avoiding of some confidentiality and other trade-offs. I'm not sure that it's a very nice solution. It's just an idea and concept, and you already read about that, and that's where actually our discussion have started. But I will be very happy to hear your opinion and move forward from this point. So probably the best answer will be just next to 5 or 6 slides, which, if you're okay, I can go through, and then we will reiterate these questions that you have.
So I'm available. I know I'm available. I don't know if other people have time commitments.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm available to stay longer. I wasn't sure what the other scheduled time commitments by other participants were for this call.
Yeah, we also stay about 2 hours generally, so it should be okay.
Okay.
Okay. So the next slide is just a summary of the trade-offs between 3 schemes, and it goes with what we just discussed and what Christopher described when they made the choice. So there are very different trade-offs, and we find out that sign to contract probably the best fitting one, except that it's not perfect, and especially in context of Taproot. So with a RGB, we stick to pay-to-contract commitment. But in terms of the identity, which I will be describing on the last slide, we think that sign-to-contract will be still a better option, but only, of course, if we can combine it with a proper solution for multi-sig scheme. So if you really need a multi-sig scheme, the public key tweak is actually today the thing that you can use for sure, and we are not yet still sure about sign-to-contract. If you will combine these ways of defining single-use seal and committing to the message, you have two ways of defining single-use seal with a UTXO or public key or address, which is similar, so address or public key, and UTXO. And you have two ways of committing to the message, pay-to-contract, which potentially enhanced with a op return variant if you need to support legacy hardware, or sign-to-contract. And if you combine these two ways of defining the seal and create a commitment to the message, you will get four variants of how single-use seals can be applied to Bitcoin. We created identifiers for all of them. So the commitments that I used based on the public key single-use seals are starting with a PK, and the commitments based on the transaction UTXO with the TX. And depending on where the commitment to the message goes, to the input or to the output, we name them either PK, either or I suffixed. So, and I tried to list the additional requirements and possible application of each of the combinations. So if you will use UTXO-based commitments and use a pay-to-contract scheme, you basically get this scheme is selected for RGB. This is very universal application, but it requires deterministic Bitcoin commitment. So you need to create a way how you will put and structure the place of the commitment in the Bitcoin transaction output, in which specific Bitcoin transaction output, such that it wouldn't compromise the confidentiality. If you use a public key-based single-use seals and sign-to-contract commitments, you will get what I will describe as Bitcoin-based identity scheme, which may be not perfect, but I think it could be a very useful thing where you may find some interesting ideas for your work. And finally, we believe that in the future, we will be able to design a commitment scheme based on the UTXO and sign-to-contract for the next version of RGB. But because of the multi-sig limitations, it will work with a Taproot-only inputs, and we will be able to create it only when the proper USIG scheme will be designed. So today we end up basically with a scheme used by RGB based on pay-to-contract commitment, and we are very happy with the way they are structured and work. And we ensure that they work from the very beginning to the end with existing infrastructure, requiring only Electrum servers, without compromising on confidentiality, and probably this would be the most interesting scheme for you. This is another explanation which I probably wouldn't spend the time. You already got this idea that how we do the single-use seal prevention of double spend with UTXO-based seals, and because we can spend the output only once with a certain transaction, that's the actual mechanic how we prevent the double commitment. And when the output spent, we define the seal as a UTXO, and when the output is spent, we put the commitment to the message into the transaction that spends that output. And with this scheme, we are left with the four main data structures, and actually 4 or 5 data structures. Two of these data structures are created at the time of single-use seal definition, 2 at the time of closing seal and used by the verify procedure. And in 2 of these types are public, stored on the proof of publication medium, for instance, inside the blockchain, and can be indexed by any indexing service. and two stored off-chain on the client-side side. And you have to keep them and pass them through the network. Each time you need to prove some to the party you're proving. The first data structure is actual seal definition, and the seal itself, it's the transaction containing UTXO, it's on chain, and the private part is the identifier of this transaction and the number of output, which is the seal definition data. And you have to, of course, keep that and pass that. But I assume you have no problem with that part. When you close the seal over the message, you need a spending transaction, which again, you keep the ID of this transaction, and you don't need to anything else that a Bitcoin Core or normal Electrum. But you also have to create extra transaction proof if you use pay-to-contract commitments, like we do in RGB. And this extra transaction proof, the content of this extra transaction proof is actually depends on the type of output. So for normal P2K hash or P2 witness K hash, it's just the original public key. For the script-based outputs, including taproot, it is a complete source of the script for script-based, and for taproot, you need to store intermediate public key. And this is the extra transaction proof that you have to store and pass upon the validation of this single-use seal. And the second part, of course, the message you are committing to. So this is the actual structure we came to with a pay-to-contract commitment. And this structure, again, works with Electrum and Bitcoin Core. The second thing that we did is the modified pay-to-contract commitment, which covers all possible exceptions and allows prevention of length extension attacks and using the recent proposals of tagged hashes from Taproot. And this protocol we defined as LNPBP, which again may be useful for other cases than RGB. This protocol specifies how you can commit to a certain message into a public key. Whatever you will use this public key for later doesn't matter. You can use it for Bitcoin or not for Bitcoin. But there was a lot of review we went through with this LNPBP1 standard, and it actually, we believe right now, is the best way of doing the pay-to-contract commitment scheme. The second problem that we had to solve is the deterministic Bitcoin commitments, which actually a way to specify which output of the transaction will be used for storing the commitment, and how we will put the commitment inside a complex script. So we were able to find a way of putting commitment into any type of script, and this protocol we named LNPBP2 standard. It uses mini script, and with that you can put the commitment into public key in many multi-sig scheme or any taproot output, with the one exception that, yeah.
I'm sorry, is this kind of like BIP 322 that you're actually using the script as the signature scheme?
I'm not sure what is that. I can just in 2 words describe how it works. So the idea is that you can use any of the public keys within the script, and you actually commit, when you create the commitment to the message, you also have to commit to the public key normally. And if you have multiple public keys in script, you commit to the sum of the public keys. And because of that, and because of homomorphic properties of public keys, it doesn't matter in which specific public key you will put the commitment into. And this actually, if you will use the similar procedures for multi-sig, this is a partial solution for sign-to-contract problem as well, because you can basically create a commitment by the first of the signers, and you can modify the protocol in such. Yeah.
So the difference with BIP 322, basically BIP 322 allows you to sign with the same script that you use in an UTXO. So you can basically, I mean, I don't know if if it'll ultimately be used for this, but you can prove that you have an unspent transaction output with funds on it without actually spending it. So you can basically reveal the sufficient script information that, given the arbitrary message, you can say that that is the same thing that it can be used to spend this UTXO. So thus you have a proof that the UTXO is spendable without actually spending it, which is a powerful feature in and of itself. But from my vantage point, means that we can move to be completely output instead of being right now being rooted on spent transactions. We can root on unspent transactions. Anyhow, just you may want to look at that as opposed to just
not sure that it is the same. I'm not sure.
No, it's not the same.
Yeah,
You're
it's probably different.
Taking the public keys and creating a scheme that way. That's different.
Yeah, that's different, and also the main problem with this state public key is that how you parse the script without writing like in Bitcoin Core compatible way to extract all public keys from the script. And for that part, we used a mini script, and that actually makes this LNPBP2 thing working only with a mini script based with scripts that are created according to mini script rules. Okay. But because again, these are newly created script outputs, because you need to create the commitment, then it's not a problem because you still have to create the script and you basically parse it in mini script and you get mini script compatibility automatically. So this was the solution for a multi-sig problem and case, and especially we needed this because of the Lightning Network with a recent Anchored Outputs proposal, which is already part of the Lightning Network standard. All outputs of the Lightning commitment transaction are script-based, and without this ability, we wouldn't be able to bring the RGB to the Lightning Network, so that's why we had to invent this thing. And the second standard, which is lnp-bp3, is how we define which transaction output contains the commitment. And after long discussions that we had in this community more than a year ago, the best way that we found was that we combine two factors. One of the factors is coming from on-chain data, and it's basically the fee of the transaction. The other factor is certain number specific to exact protocol or case that you're using, which is publicly known. But because you can store multiple commitments in the same transaction, there is no way to predict which specific commitment you're storing. And this gives protection from chain analysis tools. So we do a sum of the fee and this protocol factor, then modular divide the sum of the number of outputs, and deterministically defines the output into which we put the commitment. And you are very flexible because you can adjust the fee on one Satoshi, and by doing that, you can change the output you would like the commitment to go into.
I like that one. We could do that instead of having it always be the first output. We could probably do this fairly easily.
Yeah. So that's the challenges and solutions that we had. I will skip the next slide, which is more about the implementation, which I will leave to the end of the presentation. And just briefly name that you can use single-use seals outside of Bitcoin. The only question is why you will need that, because if you have something centralized, you don't need a client-side validation or single-use seals or open standard, just create a database. And if you are building the centralized application, there is more decentralized and trustless proof of application medium today than Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin is the main application of single-use seals. Right. However, I'd like to mention, go on. somebody was going to say something? Okay, I'd like to mention that there are some future prospects, very early stage, for the single-use seals outside of Bitcoin. They are both around the creation of blockchain-less and coin-less scalable of proof of publication mediums dedicated to single-use seals. So it's similar to what Giacomo said at the beginning of the presentation. If we will have to keep Bitcoin these days, we wouldn't create a blockchain. And we need something more scalable and efficient. And we will put Bitcoin just into the client-side validated data, while the consensus, the public consensus part, have to be more scalable than today's Bitcoins. And there are two work in progress on this regard. First of all, Peter Todd himself works on the proof marshal, which I have to frankly say I don't understand what it is, but he understands and does something very interesting. And the second thing is my company and I work on what we codename SigChain, which is basically a way how you can create a commitment medium where the full block is reduced to a single public key. And this single public key can contain arbitrary amount of commitments because of homomorphic properties, and all the proofs are stored client-side, meaning that each block may contain practically unlimited amount of the commitment transactions. So you have a very small blockchain size, much smaller than with a Mimblewimble. You have higher scalability, and basically it uses sign-to-contract way of creating commitment. So the block is actually not a public key, but the signature, single signature. But it's very early on, and it's not the question of the topic of the presentation today. So the applications, the finalizing the presentation. The first application of single-use seals is the RGB, which is confidential and scalable smart contract system based on the client-side validation, the topic that I am describing today. And this RGB works already with Bitcoin on-chain and Lightning Network. It is based on, because basically commitments and single-use seals are not necessarily part of the blockchain. They are based on Bitcoin transaction, if you have seen. And the Bitcoin transactions, maybe it's just the question how you trust that Bitcoin transaction state is final. And you trust it mostly in most of the cases because they are part of the blockchain, they are mined into the blockchain. But if you run some Lightning Network channel, you can also trust transactions which are part of the recent state of this Lightning Network channel. And that's what brings single-use seals into the Lightning Network. Potentially, RGB may work with other Bitcoin chains like Liquid. We are not working on that, but theoretically, there is no limits from that, or with a future coin-less proof of publications mediums I was just mentioning. Unfortunately, RGB is not that simple as single-use seals, which are not simple by themselves. It's based on them, but we had to insert many other things like multi-message commitments, because we may assign a lot of different state under different smart contracts to the same Bitcoin UTXO. Nothing prevents you from doing that in the client-side validation world. You also need to introduce this concept of the state, of the data, some scripting, virtual machines, and so on and so forth. So you have a very multidimensional many-to-many relations between these components, and we will spend more time on that in the further presentations. And the second application of single-use seals are Bitcoin-based identity. And why we think that this is a good application? Because we have a problem, which Christopher already mentioned in his question, how to announce identity revocation in a unique way. And we think that the single-use seals is a solution for addressing this problem. If we structure it this following way, the identity definition is an extended public key plus some revocation UTXO. We say this UTXO, when it is spent, it means the revocation preview. And for that UTXO, we can use transaction output-based single-use seals with a sign-to-contract commitments. It is proposed to use them. Then With these identities, we may have a KYC-less identity authentication scheme, where the login is the actual public key and chain code, plus unhardened derivation path from this identity xpub to the pub key. So basically, you can use different logins under the same identity, and that's very strikes and procedure, because sometimes you may be able to hide your identity further by using each time a new public key for the login procedures from malware and man in the middle and all type of stuff. And the password is the signature created with this public key. At the time when you need to revoke the identity, you just spend the UTXO, closing that single useal over a message, which is the new identity public key. And you use this public key as a signature L value, so R value. So basically, this is assigned to contract scheme. In this case, all of the other parties will see that the fact that you have revoked your identity, so they will not accept your authentication with the public keys derived under the vault identity, but they don't know your full extended public key. They will know just the portion of this public key. And this is solvable. Next time you will log into such system, you will provide the chain code, as I said from the previous point, which is the other part of the identity of the extended public key, and they will still be able to authenticate you and match that you using the new identity. So you have additional protection of the privacy here, because you don't, after the first revocation, you do not expose even a full public key, full extended public key, and unless you try to authenticate with some system. And I did this email this February to Bitcoin Dev mail list, which describes this identity scheme. And actually, that might be the case that you may find something useful from here.
So we are doing basic, so BTCR 0.1 is sort of your line one of the previous slide. You're revoking the UTXO by spending it, but in that spending transaction, you can then have because obviously you're spending it, so now you're creating new UTXOs. You can optionally by signal, hey, I'm not revoking, I'm rotating. So if you just spend it plain, then it's just going to be a revocation of the key. If you spend it with the right new UTXOs created from spending it, you then can create a chain to the next key. The difference is that we did look into the public key and chain code type of things early on. And besides the fact that Peter Woolley will slap you because he just doesn't, he invented it, but he doesn't like it. It feels like it's overused and whatever. There were just too many scenarios where the master key was compromised and you needed to be able to move to a new master key or something of that nature. And the thing we liked about the particular approach, never implemented because of the multi-sig issues that you've talked before, was that I could set it up such that it was a multi-sig of my colleagues who could spend the UTXO, and by spending it would then be able to there's a function in MuSig where they can collaboratively create a new key for me. So they never actually have the key, but they can basically independently send me a new key that they've created for me after revoking it. So we were kind of leaning in that direction architecturally, so that we were not stuck with. So we were not stuck with master key. Now I will say, LethiKit, for instance, some of our newer apps at Blockchain Commons, you never use your seeds. You on a network device. So your seeds are generate a QR with the child, and that way, there's still less, significantly less risk of since the a network device never sees the seeds; they only see the individual next key in the series using crypto request. So there are some scenarios, using those kinds of devices that I'm a bit more comfortable with using a chain code style technique. I did notice in your next one, in your next slide, you had a normal and change and tweaked. I thought that was interesting because we used number 7 because we didn't know if anybody had used change types other than 0 or 1. We used change type 7 so that for all of the identity transactions, all the identity UTXOs, excuse me, so that your Bitcoin wallet won't accidentally spend it, but you can still use the same. You can use a standard
same public keys, yeah.
Right.
It's extended public keys, yeah.
So I'm not sure.
Well,
I presume tweaked is your
Yeah, it's pretty much the same you're saying. Maybe it's not 2, but everything from 2 to this number, which can be used for tweaked keys and maybe protocol specific. For RGB, we, for instance, selected 800,000 to so on the number, which is basically the decimal for RGB letters,
right.
Decimal codes. Which is far enough. But yeah, the same is the 7, which you selected, is pretty much the same approach. Well, I would like to comment, though, on the losing of the private keys, of extended keys, sorry. First of all, if you use the multi-sig scheme in such a way that it allows recovery using friends, you don't have the sign to contract problem with multi-sigs because you may be the last party signing the transaction. You can organize the creation of the spending transaction in such a way that you will be the last party, and you wouldn't give other parties unfair advantage in this case scenario. So probably you can take the sign to contract without any significant problems here. The second thing is that here, if you see, I deliberately combined the identity with the derivation path standard, because the identity here is this middle part of the derivation path, the real identity. And there is a scoped identity. So in this part, when you do the login and identity definition, you use the scoped identity, which is a hardened derivation from the real identity. And you never expose the real identity. And each time you leak the scoped extended public key, you do the revocation procedure, but under this main identity. And again, this allows you to do this chain code based update right inside the input, spending input with a sign to contract commitment, and maybe a fix to the problem that you have just mentioned.
Yeah, well, definitely, if you're going to continue this particular thing, I highly recommend you look at crypto request URs and their ability to ask for descriptors and HD keys, because then you can use, like LeafyKit is a do-it-yourself device. The keys never are on the network. So you basically say, given this root fingerprint, give me, the either the HD key or the actual final, bear key without the chain code, using this crypto request. And I know that several other hardware vendors, Foundation Devices, the new hardware app that's from the people who did Kobo, but they've moved on to a new company. Keymaster, I think, is the name of theirs. They're all planning on supporting this UR standard. So that at least makes me feel a little more confident that people won't have their seeds on network devices like they do often today. So,
can you send the link to the chat on this UR crypto request, or because I'm not familiar with that?
Sure. There's a
That
video
sounds interesting.
and some other stuff. So, but yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
I'm putting in the same, I'll put in the same chat. There are two interesting projects in the DID community that you ought to take a look at. The simplest one is DID peer, which is an off-chain DID where you're basically sending your proofs along with your with your peer relationship. So their particular focus is sort of the peer. Everybody has a peer DID. Often people use things like Diffie-Hellman and things of that nature, just between two parties. So there's some interesting stuff there. And then there's Carry, which has a lot of stuff that I don't understand, but there's some good stuff in the Carry. So I'll put that in the
yeah, that will be also interesting. I also like to mention that previously we had a call where I was giving this another presentation, which is called Identity Naming, Reputation, and NFTs, how they can be done with RGB, and the difference that this is a simple schema. This is a simple schema of the identity, which doesn't require any client-side validated data. So you run that completely on-chain for authentication. But if you need a more complex scenarios, when you need to provide additional extended data related to identity, like naming and metadata and so on and so forth, of course, you can't avoid having client-side validated data. And for that specific case, we are designing the RGB-based identity schema. And I was describing why it is required. So if their identity is globally unique, verifiable, untransferable property assigned by some subject, we can merely mathematically deduce that we need a client-side validated state system, which is RGB. And I was describing how such system can be designed for RGB. And in fact, it is an extension of this schema based on Bitcoin-based identities when you add the RGB smart contract data at this part of the derivation, providing all the metadata, naming, and everything else you like to link to this identity. So basically, there is an extension with the client-side validated data, which may leverage the Lightning Network peer-to-peer infrastructure to pass around the metadata and additional information. And the last part, which I skipped briefly when I was running through that presentation, is actually we have all of that, which we discussed today, implemented as a Rust code, and it is a part of two main libraries. The first one is a client-side validation library. Sorry, there is a mistake here. Client-side validation library. And the second part is part of Bitcoin library. So everything that is generic to the single-use seals and doesn't directly related to Bitcoin is made part of the client-side validation library. And Bitcoin applications of single-use seals and deterministic Bitcoin commitments required to construct single-use seals with Bitcoin transactions, they are part of the P-Core library. And these libraries can be found first of all, the client-side validation library consists of multiple libraries, including single-use seals library. It is more generic and allows you to construct multiple things related to client-side validation outside of scope of single-use seals. And there is a single-use seals library, which is part of this library defining the API to properly work with a single-use seals. And again, I mentioned on top of that, we have a BP core library applying that to Bitcoin keys, transactions, and implementing this LNPBP 1, 2, 3 procedures. So that's all on my side for today.
Thank you. Some other questions, just as far as I'm trying to understand, where RGB is in relationship as a community, as a multi-vendor organization, working on these things. How are you trying to drive these things forward in a to avoid vendor lock-in and things of that nature? Obviously, your stuff is open source, but what other companies are committed to using RGB and driving this stuff forward, have significant people offering code updates and things of that nature? Like, how big is this community?
Sorry, I was on mute. The original community, where the RGB project has started, I have to say, had more than probably 20 people contributing their ideas to these protocols design, and among them Giacomo, who is here, and plenty of his friends and Italian community. They literally these protocols were discussed. The protocols I am talking about today, they were discussed more than a year, more than 2 years probably. And these standards is basically, when I came to the RGB when it was structured in terms of single-use seals part, at least. And I just wrote the standards from the state of the work that was existed at the state those days. We gathered the Milano conference at the end of 2009, and there were again about 15 people on that conference who were participated actively in the development. After that, the main implementation was done by me. I mean, the Rust code. And however, still there are different open source, and it's all open source, and there are different people who submit from out of nowhere. They come to GitHub and submit pull requests. So if we will count the contributors to the code, we will again get the figure of more than 10 different peoples. And recently we were happy that we've got about more than a year ago, we had an audit by Peter Todd of the code. And just recently, we had 2 more audits of the independent companies who were planning to use RGB for their own products and needs. And they came through the audit of the code-based system and standards. And just over the last 3 months, last quarter, I closed probably more than 15 pull requests to both standards and code base, and there were even some bugs found there. And to keep this independent, we created, me and Giacomo, in the late 2019, we created this LNPBP Standards Association, which is a non-profit entity, Swiss-based, governing the standards and maintaining the reference implementations of the technology, keeping it all under MIT and Apache 2 license. The main problem today that we were talking about single-use seals mostly today. When we will talk about RGB, there is much more complexity involved. And there is not a lot of people who really understand how it works. But again, so that's kind of problem. But from my experience, I have at least 2 cases of people coming from nowhere, paid by private companies, reading the standards, watching the videos, doing the audit, and finding the issues and doing the proposals, which shows their deep understanding of how the system works in all details. So it's not impossible to understand it if you have desire to invest time and money into it. So while currently RGB is not very well decentralized in terms of development, it is free and open source, and I do believe that there are no boundaries for it to be used by the community.
So at this point, that you said two companies are planning on making an investment to use it in their products or services or whatever, but they have not announced
No, more than two companies, much more. It's just two companies who already invested into auditing the RGB technology.
But have any of them announced their participation or?
Well, I don't track their public announcements. In communications with me, they clearly announce, and for instance, I have my own company and I have plans and do the products on top of RGB, and we are in partnership with 3 other companies already who also do their products on RGB and investing money into that, and many of them are usually on our calls. Condensate Bank, Nodal, these are 2 Swiss-based companies, and Hodl Exchange, which is quite well known in Riga. And we know about 3 companies who already use the code of RGB in their products, which are not probably left beta stage, but anyway, they are relying on part of their system on either LNPBP technologies or RGB. And there are, for instance, Bitfinex, of course, who had plans to issue USDT on RGB and was one of the sponsors until the last September of the RGB development and LNPBP Standards Association. The recent situation with their plans is not very clear. So I will leave it up to them to announce are they still planning to use the technology for USDT or not. But otherwise, there is we receive a lot of requests from people who are, so probably more than 5 companies wrote me over the last 2 months about asking questions how to use that or that particular library in their cases.
So at this point, how about, I mean, it seems like from the descriptions, and I may be, wrong on this, that each of them are using RGB kind of independently. So they're, each creating their own state chains, or they're using your version of the seals for their own purposes. There hasn't, at this point, there isn't. Do you have any interoperability specs or specifications for proving interoperability?
Not exactly that way. So I will categorize all companies who we are talking to into 2 categories. The first category is they don't use RGB and don't plan to use RGB itself as a stack of technologies. What they use is specific standards. We made RGB very modular, and everything that can be used outside of the main scope of RGB as a smart contract, large smart contract system is a separate standards. We have like more than 50 of them. And like this LNPBP one for creating public key commitments, which we can apply to many different systems and so on and so forth. And the first category is the companies who are using these standards with the code modules and libraries developed as an implementation of these standards. And they're doing their own stuff with that. They're integrating that into their logic, and there is no interoperability required because basically they are just using small modules in a very modular way. The second group of companies is companies that directly plan to use RGB in their products. And, well, I can't speak on their behalf, but at least we talk maybe more than 20 companies who had these plans at certain stages. And they plan to use the technology as a whole, the resulting RGB technology, in terms of libraries, high-level libraries created for wallets, for exchanges, for custodials, and they will not modify or create their own state channels. Basically, RGB, it doesn't have a shared consensus, it doesn't have a global network and anything like that. Each smart contract in RGB is a separated. Even if you as a company will issue 2 or 3 assets, they will be separated from each other, like sharded. So, but they will use technology without the modification. As a whole, RGB, this smart contracting system. So probably that would be the most proper way of answering your question,
Okay.
but I'm not sure that that was the question you asked.
No. I'm trying to get an idea. So let me explain a little bit. So Blockchain Commons is an open infrastructure organization. So, I'm the, co-author of the SSL standard, co-author of the DID standard, et cetera. So I've been involved in the standards community for a long time, and there is a lot of these sort of underlying things that for one reason or another don't get the attention that they need because they're difficult to invest in. So we're, what we're really focused on is, blockchain infrastructure that allows for independence, basically, freedom from, involuntary oversight, external control, gatekeepers, et cetera. Obviously privacy, including coercion, non-correlation, pseudonymity, et cetera. Resilience, feels like a lot of these security standards out there, actually decrease resilience for negligible understanding of the risk modeling. And then finally, we really want to focus on open infrastructure that is, not just open source, but vendor neutral, then, no vendor lock-in, no tech, as little technology lock-in as possible for our patrons. Our patrons are all over the place, although lately they've been doing a lot of wallet stuff with us because, wallets is one of the core things in all of this. Where do you store all of these keys that you've got? And trying to make it, sort of responsible key management an important part of our work in the last year. We have a group of wallet companies that are, looking at, not jumping into the Ethereum smart contract community with things like NFTs and other uses of smart contracts from that community, and are really wanting to begin to leverage it off the more secure base that Bitcoin has, or do not wish to have any more tokens, financial tokens. Like they don't want to create a new, a new form of gas or a Ethereum timestamp token or whatever for every single one of their services. They want to be able to sit, for instance, use Lightning, have Lightning buy bandwidth, have, Bitcoin be the settlement layer. So they're all beginning to investigate this. They're all going, okay, so how are our wallets, what are their architectures? What kind of keys are we going to store? What kind of proofs are we going to need to store to be able to do this type of stuff? And they're asking for our guidance. And so, BTCR is coming back on the table because a lot of them have, real concerns with the sort of bespoke custom blockchains that are emerging around some of the DID work. There are other companies that are basically, because they're working with governments or with other people, cannot use a token or an Ethereum, a classic Ethereum token because their partners and principals or contracts don't allow them to, but they could use either the peer-to-peer type things or be able to use a public blockchain like Bitcoin. So anyhow, I'm just trying, part of my exploration here with you guys today, and I very much appreciate you putting together the meeting, was to try to understand, where is everybody and who is everybody, and see if I can't help bring them together to make some, make sure that we have the underlying infrastructure that we need to support all of these types of things.
Yes, thank you for all the details, and we are very welcome anybody who is interested in the stuff that we are doing. So feel free to use and apply any of the standards if you see that we have solved some of the problems that you witnessed to the stuff that you are doing. And we are very open to suggestions, and everybody who asks that question or try to improve the stuff that we are working on. So thank you for the interest and your time and the thoughts that you shared with us. And we are open for cooperation and collaboration in any possible way with the stuff that you are working on.
Cool. Well, thank you again for doing this call, and also specifically one of the things I know I immediately am interested in is your particular trick for using the fee and the modulo to determine which of the output indexes is the correct one. So if you can point me to that. And then,
right now, doing that.
Okay. Well, I'm very interested.
I will send it to the chat just in a second.
And then I don't know if other people haven't got questions. I didn't mean to completely dominate the call. And hi, Giacomo. I got to get to Italy again soon. So
I have a question for probably for Maxim.
Sure.
So I was thinking about well, I guess the question is closer related to client-side validation, but it's which isn't in the title of your talk, but single-use seals are a instance of that, I suppose.
Yeah, and foundation.
So, yeah, a foundation of that. So one thing I've been wondering is how you would do, or if it's possible to do something like domain name registration on a client-side validated model. And my suspicion is that you can't, because that requires a global state that anyone can look up and get the domain name that's registered to whatever IP address. Do you have any thoughts on whether you could do it in a model like that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had thoughts, and for more than a year, I was thinking that it is not possible to do it exactly as you said, because you need a global consensus. However, recently, but I continue to investigate into this area, and recently we came to the conclusion, me and my colleagues, that there are still a pretty advanced stuff that you can do for decentralized naming system and name resolution system if you combine client-side validation with a Lightning peer-to-peer network. Well, not a current Lightning peer-to-peer network, but extend Lightning peer-to-peer network, and whatever we do to Lightning peer-to-peer network, we call Bifrost, part of Bifrost protocol. So by combining the RGB and Bifrost, you potentially can do the decentralized naming system. And we already developed a schema, RGB24, for such system. And briefly, I was giving a talk on one of the calls. Probably will ask Olga to find the link on that video recording. There are just 3 slides where I was explaining in details how it can be built. The idea is that you use RGB and client-side validation to register with the single-use seals events of naming when you use particular name, and use it for linking the name to specific identities. You provide that via the RGB smart contracts. As for the way how you can declare the priority of your naming over anybody else using the same name, we decided that potentially, at least from what we know about the game theory, and we have quite good experts on the game theory and words, Sabina, she's here on the call, and from the game theory, you can, if you will put you can still reach the global consensus without blockchain, but with an ephemeral state, like in Lightning Network, if you will require that anybody registering the name will announce this name to peer-to-peer network immediately, well, after some seconds of name registration. And we will create incentivization for storing this data for the Lightning networks because each of the requests for the name resolution will be done again by the Lightning nodes when they are queried, and they will be paid in Satoshis over the Lightning Network again for this name resolution. So they will have incentives to store these names and keep them in their database. And if somebody will announce a name which was registered a long time ago, and this can be verified with a single-use seals, the network should reject that name. So basically, you have a homestead principle of the name registration. You have decentralized network of name resolution with a Lightning Network. You have decentralized database. You have a incentivization model without introducing any new coin, with just Satoshis and Bitcoins paid over the Lightning Network. And you have maintenance of the database in form of client-side validated state with RGB. So by that combination, we believe that it is, well, it has to be proven by practice, but we will work on a certain stage of that. And we believe that you can build a decentralized name resolution system. And we already designed RGB specific part of it, which is called RGB24 schema.
Yeah,
So
it's intriguing.
sorry.
I have a quick question on that. So in effect, it is a pet name system, or sometimes called a local name system. So multiple parties can claim a name, but then you're doing some kind of a bidding system or something such that the more reliable, the more reviewed names, the more supported names rise to the top. So it's not a how can I say, it's not deterministic. Is that correct?
It's not deterministic. However, we are not using the mechanism that you mentioned. Instead of bidding and competing for the names, we require that each name registration have to involve creation of Bitcoin transaction. So you will pay fees for that. And you will be able to time order name registrations, but the Bitcoin transaction wouldn't contain the name itself. So we link through the RGB. And by that, you can't Kyber squat a lot of names because it will cost you quite a lot of money spending on Bitcoin transactions. And you have a very well-defined ordering of the priority of the name registration. The only potential problem here is that still the consensus, you're relying on the ephemeral data present in the Lightning Network, which may be lost. However, we believe if the size of network is large and there is no more than half of the bad actors, the network will not eventually, but quite quickly came to the state when the first who registered and announced the registration of the name will own this name without any bidding.
If two people claim the same name at around the same time, let's say within 30 seconds of one another, how does the network come to consensus on, or I suppose both of them can store whatever data they want in Bifrost, right? Or just what is your reaction to that? Half of a question.
The reaction is to see which transaction was mined first. He will be the owner. So to declare the name, you need to do the three things. You have to create a RGB genesis, link it to on-chain Bitcoin transaction that has to be mined, and publish that information into Bifrost network, which is a network on top of Lightning Network. And the moment of the registration is the moment of transaction getting into the block. And even if two transactions registering the same name gets into the same block, you still can order them. And you can well define properties, which of this name registration will be a valid one and not valid one. And the moment when you publish the information to Bifrost network doesn't matter unless you spend more than 30 seconds or minute to publish this information, which removes your right to declare the name, meaning that you registered the name of, yeah.
But don't you have to continue to pay for the name to be able to keep it? And isn't there a race condition? Okay, because I thought you said there were ongoing costs to prevent squatting.
No. You pay once for the registration with a fee of Bitcoin transaction.
Okay.
Well, let's. So you can you squat on it after that, and then only sell it when you're ready?
And after you registered, you can sell it the moment you like to. And the sell procedure is organized with RGB smart contract. So the ownership is managed then after with this RGB smart contract normal.
Well, let's say that I buy Bitcoin.com on this system, for example, and then I die. Is there a transfer mechanism for that, or is it lost forever? Because I'm basically forever
Well,
squatting on it now.
whoever will own the private keys to spend UTXO, he will inherit this. If nobody will own your private keys from with your Bitcoins, you will lose both your Bitcoins and the names that you own.
You say I lose them. Can someone else pick them up even if they don't have my private keys?
The same rule applies as for Bitcoin. If somebody will be able to pick up your Bitcoins, he will be to pick up your names. If he wouldn't be able to pick up your Bitcoins, he will never be able to pick up your names.
Yeah. Wow, it's. I think it might be an improvement if you did have to, if there was an agreed upon expiry time of like 5 years, and after 5 years you have to do the whole process again in order to get your name back.
Technically it can be introduced.
The problem with some of these, I mean, this is an ongoing topic. Probably there's been at least 3, maybe 4 papers at rebooting on the topic of decentralized name resolution and things of that nature. There's a lot of weird race conditions you can get into where, you know, somebody knows that your name's going to expire, you know, at such and such a time. They can denial service you. They can do a variety of other different types of things to try to claim the name. And it just gets into a real game theory mess when you have these transitions. I personally am not a big fan of truly decentralized names. There are thousands of people named Christopher Allen, you know, in the real world. You know, most people don't have a hard time finding this particular Christopher Allen. So, you know, and it's typically
the decentralized name doesn't
doesn't
necessarily require names to be unique. You
Right.
can have multiple.
Yeah. So the pet name is what it was called back in the Xanadu days. I personally prefer something called relative local names as another variant of it. And in that, it's a lot more to do with your trust relationships and associations. So you know Maxim, and Maxim knows me. My name's going to flow to the top in this particular subject area when you want to try to find me. And then, you know, we may do some other forms of auth to be able to, create a peer-to-peer relationship between us where you don't really care that I'm using an onion address with a, 36 character name in it. So that's kind of what we're doing right now with DID Onion, which is a very, very simple DID protocol, is to extend it with the ability to be able to share pet names. And then it's up to your trust metrics and your relationships. You would go, this is Christopher's, Jonah's, Michael's, Maxim. And at some point, when you and I have a trust relationship, it becomes Christopher's Maxim as soon as you and I have a peer-to-peer. So that's
interesting. Can you share a link for that work in progress?
Sure.
Where to check it out? Yeah, that would be interesting to check.
Okay, so the underlying DID onion is here. Although it doesn't have the peer-to-peer stuff in it yet, we're still working on that, looking at Carrie and DID peer and maybe your peer method. And then the other one is rebooting or what? Pet name. God, we have like a dozen things on naming. It's like I said, this topic, it comes up over and over again. I mean, even stacks, the old came from like the second rebooting. So people keep on wanting to do this.
Is there any search facility on this website, Blockchain Commons on GitHub, or is there any way
right now,
we can
almost
look for
everything
the
is on
stuff?
GitHub, but this particular thing, so this is rebooting Web of Trust. So we basically, until this COVID year, we met every 6 months, get 100 people together and write 10 to 20 papers together in 4 or 5 days. So
Wow.
so this, we've generated over 70 papers. So, and of course, DIDs came out of that. Verifiable claims weren't invented there, but anyhow, the list of papers from Web of Trust, and that's just the published collaborative papers. There's another 300 papers that are called topic papers, and there's some really good topic papers. So I'm trying to find the naming papers. There's been several of them, but I think they were topic papers, not collaborative. So everything that's on that link I just gave you
Perfect.
I
see it.
has been reviewed. I wouldn't call it peer reviewed. It's not the same kind of standard, but they've all been written by multiple people from multiple companies. So you can't get published unless there's more than one company involved. It's kind of one of our so it's not quite as high as peer review. But one second, I think I have a pet name that'll solve it in this organization. So where is that file? Yeah, I think this is the first one, although this has come up over and over again. Where's the chat room? Here it is. So I think that was the first pet names paper, but the term goes back to Xanadu days in the late 80s. So are you seeing that URL? My chat room thing is kind of gray for it. Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Good. Okay. So anyhow, there's a lot of resources in Blockchain Commons. Also, that GitHub weboftrust.info is searchable as well. So we pretty much have everything in GitHub, including our website, for both of these. So if you use the GitHub search, you can find just about everything.
Thank you for sharing all these links. Very, very useful information. I will dig more into, and we'll be happy to continue the discussion.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the next things is there's other stakeholders out there who want to try to solve this problem. I mean, the way I described it when I was in the Netherlands last to the international community was, I really appreciate that the Netherlands, Europe in general, Switzerland, Canada, New Zealand, etc., are doing state-sponsored, privacy-oriented, decentralized identifiers. But in the end, they're still state-sponsored, and their privacy issues are, and the things that they're trying to deal with are very different than, say, people in Venezuela, Iran, Burma, etc. So, we really need these trustless, if that's legally enabled self-sovereign identity, or less identity, as some people call it, we still need trustless identity forms for higher risk scenarios. And, BTCR was originally intended for that, but it's languished because there's just not the funding that, I mean, at this point, it looks like legally enabled self-sovereign identity is going to become a billion-dollar industry. Lots and lots of VCs, government monies coming in from multiple governments, et cetera. But there's almost no investment in trustless, decentralized identities. So we're obviously I'm very interested in that, and there are other parties that are committed to supporting that, including Human Rights Foundation. They gave us a small grant this year, and others, to try to see if we can't move this forward. So I think maybe one of the next meetings is, let's get some of the different people's ideas together and hash them out, and try to put some proof of concepts together and create a common approach to it.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. We probably should set up a call in a month from now, for instance, inviting different peoples, and you're welcome to propose sessions who we should invite and share the thoughts addressing this topic, because it's one of the main interests that we had. And we believe that, for instance, the systems we built, like RGB, are not only about tokens, but more about creating a more complex, decentralized problem solution, and identity is certainly one of them. Yeah,
well, definitely the Web of Trust community. I mean, it's too bad because of COVID. We've had to cancel 3 events, but the next one was supposed to be in The Hague last fall. I think it's going to be not this fall, but the fall in 2022 will be our next big face-to-face. So we're trying to figure out how to do these very intensely collaborative events online in the medium term. So so we've been trying some different formats for doing that sort of collaboration, joint writing type stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, and where are you usually meeting, in United States or in Europe?
No, it's all over the world. So the last 2 were in Barcelona and Prague. So that was then we were supposed to be in Argentina when COVID started. Then Singapore was supposed to be last fall. This spring was supposed to be The Hague. And that's as far ahead as we got, but we had to, because of COVID, we've had to cancel these. So we've been hosting some virtual events to where we try to collaboratively create together. So for instance, I'll send you this bookmark to my tweet. Where is it? Like, here is we got about, 30 people together to do a collaborative salon on decentralized privacy. Like, what is the state of the art of decentralized privacy? And it wasn't a 4-day event, so we didn't have 50 papers, but we do have some interesting output from our 4-hour event, and you might want to take a look at that. So, we do these regularly. Every couple of
We are losing your voice, Christopher. I don't know if everybody.
Yeah, so we do these. We're going to be doing more of these salons until we can meet again. Probably right now, it looks like it'll be The Hague in fall of 2022, and I'll go see Giacomo in Italy in the month before or month after or something like that.
Yeah, Christopher, we moved to Switzerland permanently, but we are still very close to Italy. So if there are no particular restrictions, we can meet in Italy.
Too.
Okay.
I spent a month in Zurich recently, and that was a blast.
Great. We're close to Lugano, and we can easily get back to Italy in a few minutes.
Yeah.
And Christopher, let me know when you will be next time in Switzerland, because I'm in Zug, and it's not a problem to go to Zurich, and we'll be happy to meet you in person.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again. I've got a call in 10 minutes. I'm booked all day.
Thank you for your time. It was very interesting call.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Ciao, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. Bye. So, guys, it's
Thank
been
you,
2
everybody.
hours. If you
More
don't
than
have any
happy.
questions, I would offer, to wrap this up, and I can see people popping out. So in case you have any questions, you know where to find us. Drop the questions to our RGB chat on Reddit. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
thanks. Cheers.